Have you ever been teased, picked on, or even called a name? It's not a good feeling. Well, today we are going to read this fabulous book by Chris Van Allsburg called The Widow's Broom, where this magical broom has some issues with some people mistreating him. And if you stick around with me, we're going to find out how he solves his problem. Welcome back, Reading Ravens. I'm so glad you joined me today in reading this story that is so appropriate for this time of year because it's just a few days away from Halloween. And this story gives a little bit of that suspenseful vibe, but not too creepy, I promise. So as we read the story though, I want you to notice these wonderful, wonderful pictures that this illustrator did in this book because they look so realistic even though they are black and white, and it just goes to show you that you don't have to have color for it to be really beautiful pictures. Also, these pictures are going to give you many clues about the setting, so I want you to be thinking about that as I read the story. When and where do you think this story took place? Let's get started. Witches' brooms don't last forever. They grow old, and even the best of them one day lose the power of flight. Fortunately, this does not happen in an instant. A witch can feel the strength slowly leaving her broom. The sudden burst of energies that once carried her quickly into the sky become weak. Longer and longer running starts are needed for takeoff. Speedy brooms that, in their youth, outraced hawks are passed by slow-flying geese. When these things happen, a witch knows it's time to put her old broom aside and have a new one made. On very rare occasions, however, a broom can lose its power without warning and fall with its passenger to the earth below, which is just what happened one cold autumn night many years ago. Out of a moonlit sky, a dark cloaked figure came spinning to the ground. The witch, along with her tired broom, landed beside a small white farmhouse, the home of a lonely widow named Minna Shaw. At daybreak, Widow Shaw discovered the witch lying in her vegetable garden. She was bruised and bloody and couldn't stand up on her own. In spite of her fear, and because she was a kind woman, Minna Shaw helped the witch inside and put her to bed. The witch asked Minna Shaw to draw the curtains, then wrapped herself tightly in her black cape and fell soundly asleep. She lay there perfectly still all day and all evening. When she finally awoke at midnight, her wounds had completely healed. She rose from the bed and moved silently through the widow's house. Minna Shaw was asleep in a chair by the fireplace, where embers of a dying fire glowed on the hearth. The witch knelt and took one of the red-hot coals in her hand. I bet you that was really hot. Outside, she made a fire of leaves and twigs, then dropped a strand of her hair into the flame. The fire hissed and crackled, burning with a brilliant blue light. Before long, the witch could see a dark form flying overhead. It was another witch, who circled slowly and landed beside the fire. The two women spoke briefly, the first witch gesturing toward the garden where her old broom rested. Then they sat side by side on the second witch's broom and flew off over the treetops. So I'm thinking from my text evidence in this middle paragraph that she made the fire and used the strand of her hair in the fire as a searchlight, so to speak, like a signal for the other witch to know where to pick her up from. It's my favorite picture. It's so beautiful. When Minna Shaw woke up, she wasn't surprised to find that her guest had gone. Witches, she knew, had unusual powers. It didn't surprise her either when she saw that the old broom had been left behind. The widow guessed it had lost its magic. It was an ordinary broom now, just like the one she kept in her kitchen. She began using it around the house and found that it was no better or worse than brooms she'd used before. One morning, Minna Shaw was still in bed when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen. She peeked in and saw something that made her heart jump. There was the broom, sweeping all by itself. It stopped for a moment and turned to the widow, then went back to work. At first, Minna was frightened, but the broom seemed harmless and, what's more, it was doing a very good job. Unfortunately, it swept all day long. In the evening, to get some peace, she locked the broom in a closet, but when it tapped on the door for more than an hour, Minna felt guilty and let it out. As she lay in bed listening to the broom sweeping each room over and over, she wondered if it could learn to do other things. In the morning, she led the broom outside and found out that it was a very good student. She needed to show it how to do something only once. Soon, the broom could chop wood and fetch water, feed the chickens, and bring the cow in from the pasture. It could even pick out simple tunes played on the piano. And I'm thinking this was very helpful since the widow, which means you've lost your spouse, was all alone and she did not have any companionship. And she was an older lady, as we can tell in the pictures. So it sounds like the broom could be really helpful to her. Not a week passed before the widow's neighbors, the Spiveys, found out about the broom. Their farm was just down the road, the only other place around. It was one of the 8 Spivey children who saw the broom first. When the boy told his father, Mr. Spivey ran straight across the road to the widow's house. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did she really have such a broom?" "Oh, yes," Minna Shaw answered. "It's wonderful." She told her neighbor all about the broom and the witch who'd left it behind. Then she took him around to the back of the house, where the broom was hard at work, splitting wood. Mr. Spivey was horrified. "This is a wicked, wicked thing," he said. "This is the devil." The broom stopped working and, still clutching the axe, hopped toward the widow and her neighbor. Mr. Spivey, red-faced with anger, turned quickly and hurried home. We're going to talk about some facts about this book, so stick around to the very end. Soon, more distant neighbors heard about the broom and visited the widow's farm. The men who saw it seemed to agree it probably was a wicked thing. But their wives pointed out that it was a great help to the widow and could play the piano well, considering that it struck just one note at a time. No one's feelings were as strong as Mr. Spivey's. "It's evil and it's dangerous," he told everyone who would listen. "We'll all be sorry if this thing stays among us." As days went by, the broom seemed as innocent and hard-working as ever. Though it had learned how to do many things, sweeping brought it special pleasure. It was, after all, a broom. Occasionally, when there was nothing left to do around the widow's house, it would hop down to the road that separated Minna Shaw's and the Spivey's farms. The road was dirt, of course, and the broom could amuse itself there for hours. One afternoon, two of the Spivey boys and their dog walked along the road where the broom was happily at work. When they saw what it was doing, they kicked the small stones the broom had swept aside back into its path. The broom ignored them and shuffled off to sweep another part of the road. But the Spivey boys would not leave it alone. They called the broom names. When it continued to ignore them, they picked up a couple of sticks and started tapping the broom's handle. Now, I'm definitely not thinking that's a very kind gesture to continue to tease and taunt the broom that way. Finally, it stopped sweeping. The broom turned to the two boys and knocked them both on the head so hard they fell to the ground in tears. The broom hopped off, but the Spivey dog ran after it, yapping and biting at its bristles. "Get 'em!" the boys yelled. The little dog leaped into the air and caught the broom by the handle, but he was not there for long. I bet you have a prediction of what happens. Oh my goodness, that's so funny. It seems sad, but don't worry. That evening, Mr. Spivey drove his wagon up to the widow's house. He was not alone. 3 men from neighboring farms were in the wagon, along with a long wooden stake and coils of rope. I wonder what they need those for. Mr. Spivey knocked loudly. When she opened her door, Minna was frightened by what she saw. "We've come for the broom," her neighbor told her. "It's beaten my sons and likely done worse to the dog." The poor animal was nowhere to be found. The widow could tell by their faces that the men would not be leaving without her broom. There was nothing she could do to stop them. For a moment she stood silently, then answered, "Of course you are right. If it could do such a thing, we must get rid of it." She led the men into her kitchen. "It sleeps in here," she whispered, pointing to a closet. "If you move it carefully, it will not wake up." The men knew how strong the broom was and hoped the widow was right. This makes me feel so sad for the widow. They're going to take away her companion, her friend, and her helper. That's not very fair. They opened the closet door, revealing the slumbering broom. One of the farmers took it out and gently held it against the stake while the others wrapped it in yards of rope. They carried the broom outside, drove the stake into the ground, and gathered straw around it. Mr. Spivey lit the fire. In no time, flames turned the broom to ashes. That breaks my heart. Life soon returned to normal around the widow's farm. The Spiveys even found their dog, healthy but hungry, caught in the branches of a tall spruce tree. Then one morning, Minna Shaw called on her neighbors with frightening news. She had seen the ghost of the broom. It was as white as snow and moved through the woods at night carrying an axe. Mr. Spivey did not believe her, but that night, under a full moon, he watched from a window as the broom's white ghost came out of the woods and slowly circled his house. The next night, it returned, circling even closer. And the night after it came again, tapping the axe lightly on the Spivey's door. I'm certain that was very disturbing, to know that the broom was tapping on your door. And he was a ghost. This gives us a nice image of what it looked like as the broom walks through the forest. The beautiful pictures with the trees with no leaves and all the leaves are on the ground is a clear indication of what time of year this took place. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Spivey packed their dearest possessions and 8 children into their wagon. Mr. Spivey tried to convince the widow to leave with them, but she chose to stay behind in her little farmhouse. She went down to the road as the wagon pulled away and waved goodbye to her neighbors. "You're a brave woman," Mr. Spivey called out. That evening, the widow fell asleep in her chair by the fire. She'd been listening to music. Simple tunes played one note at a time on the piano. A gentle tap on the shoulder woke her. She looked up and smiled at the broom. Not a ghost at all, but still covered with the coat of white paint she'd given it. "You play so nicely," Minna Shaw said. The broom bowed, put a log on the fire, and played another tune. I just love that ending. And it really gave me a sense of relief to find out that wasn't the magical broom that she let them take, was it? It was her original broom that had no magic. She fooled them, didn't she? It does teach us wisdom a little bit. And it also tells us some things about our characters, too, and how they cast judgment on this broom. The broom really wasn't doing anything wrong, yet they were wanting to destroy it. And that reminds me of the Salem witch trials that took place back in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. So that's many years ago, where girls and women were accused of being witches because they were just different. Sometimes they acted different due to sicknesses that they had. There was a certain disease called the ergot disease, yes, and it was a fungus that would produce hallucinogens on rye, so that they got it when they ate bread and it kind of poisoned them. And a hallucinogen makes you see and hear things that really aren't there. So they accused these women and girls that had eaten this bread, who really weren't witches at all, but just were acting really, really strange. They accused them of being witches. Sometimes it didn't have a very happy ending. But it is a piece of our history. So let's talk about these amazing, beautiful illustrations that are throughout this book that Chris Van Allsburg not only wrote, but yes, he was the illustrator as well. He is double talented. So the pencil that he used is called a litho pencil, and it's a very dark leaded pencil. And he created the effects of this sepia tone, black and white if you will, but kind of has a brown undertone to it. He created this effect using this pencil on a coquille board, and it's a type of drawing paper that is textured, like it has kind of a pebble formation on it that helps things stand out and the shading to be quite dramatic. But I thought that was really interesting because I did not even know that a coquille board and a litho pencil even existed. So I learned something new. Now, back to another fun fact is that Chris Van Allsburg, if you did not know this already, is the author of the fabulous Jumanji and our beloved Polar Express, along with many other wonderful books that he has written. And I just really enjoy his things. Well, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed our story, and I hope you're enjoying the first of fall. if you are watching this during fall. I will see you next time at Reading Evermore, where readers reign.